Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Hands-on Personalisation with Sitecore. We deal with many different clients, and actually the number one topic that clients ask us with regards to personalisation is actually how can we begin to personalise using Sitecore ourselves. It can seem a complicated and convoluted process at first, but hopefully during today's presentation we're going to show some of the nuts and bolts ways of getting you from zero to beginning and deploying your first personalisation scenario. So a little bit about Ratio. So Ratio is a Sitecore digital partner. We work with a broad spectrum of clients from B2B to B2C, HSBC, natural safaris. The one thing that the type of clients we work with have in common is that they use the Sitecore platform and they're looking to extract as much value from the Sitecore platform as possible. And in a nutshell, that's how do we deploy the marketing functionality of Sitecore in terms of personalization, marketing automation, creating 360 views of our customers. And we work with clients to enable them to get the most out of the platform. So Steve Renshaw is going to be our speaker for today. Steve Renshaw is a co-founder and managing partner of Ratio. He's worked with a broad spectrum of clients from HSBC, ISG to define their digital strategies, define how they want to engage with clients and mapping those strategies back against the capabilities of the platform. So just a few ground rules before we kick off today. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please input your question using the toolbox on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will endeavour to answer your questions at the end of today's presentation. The session is also recorded, and we will share a copy of the recording in the next couple of days. Without further ado, I'll just hand over to Steve to begin today's presentation.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Mario. Welcome everyone. Just a very quick lineup of what we're going to be looking at today. We've run a few workshops over the last couple of years, and we often get the comments of, yes, we've heard this all before, we actually want to see now how you go about setting it up. So today is something we promised at the last workshop we would run, and this is to have a look at a scenario that we've set up, utilising a lot of the marketing features within Sitecore, taking you through a front-end journey, and then delving in step by step and looking at how we've actually gone and set it up in the back end and relating it back to what we saw in the initial run-through. So hopefully by the end of this you'll get a good idea for how you might want to start using things like campaign codes, goals, rules, and also a lot of sort of context around how these all work as well. I'm also going to touch on reporting. We've only got about 45 minutes for the presentation today, so there's elements that I'm not going to cover, so there may be things that some people have wanted to see that they're not going to see, but hopefully we've got most bases covered in this scenario. And then as Mario says, we've got a Q&A at the end. We did get a couple of people before the webinar send through some questions that they wanted to have answered. I've tried to include as much of this in the run-through as we can without getting too tangential. But what I also wanted to do is try and answer them a couple directly at the beginning, and hopefully this gives a bit of context. What I'm going to show today is actually fairly straightforward. Setting up goals, campaign codes, applying them to content and so on is reasonably straightforward. The complexity, as those of you who've been to our workshops before, is usually in the planning, but there's also other areas as well. So I'll just talk a bit more about that to start with, and a couple of things to be wary of or to consider as you're going through this, so you can try and make life as easy as possible for yourself. So a bit of context first of all. We started Ratio a couple of years ago. And we did it because we saw a lot of clients who wanted to use personalization, who wanted to use marketing automation and so on and so forth, but never really sort of had the time or inclination or knowledge to get started. And we started out thinking, well, okay, that's going to be pretty straightforward. We've got agency backgrounds, we've got Sitecore backgrounds, it's just a case of matching it up, doing a bit of planning, implementing it, and reporting on it. And what we've found as we've gone through projects with, I think we're up to our 14th client now, is that there's actually a lot more complexity to it than that, and just things to be wary of, not to get you down, but just so you're prepared for them as you go through this process, either by yourselves or with us or with someone else. So we call it the sort of enlightenment phase, which was the first kind of 6 to 8 months of going and doing these in real sort of hardcore environments with clients in real world scenarios. The planning certainly still applies, and the planning, in our experience, makes up about 40% of a project. So if you're talking about a 10 to 15 day process, then factor in about 7 days for planning, and that's the workshopping, it's the identifying business requirements, it's setting key performance indicators, it's how are you going to measure this and what data do we want to get out of it, as well as the audiences we want to personalize for, the journeys we want to take them on, and so on. There's a whole planning process, and with about a third of our clients, I mean, the planning is actually all we've done so far because it's just turned into such a huge piece of work. What we try to then do is nail that down into something that's actually implementable, if you like, for a first phase, so that taking the path of least resistance but also delivering some value. The second thing we often find is fixing current issues with the site. I'll talk a bit more about this in a second, but often we walk into projects, we try to do as much as we can around assessment up front, but often we'll get into things like testing and so on, and we'll find things that are broken. Or we'll find things immediately that we can't even get involved with the project because templates and components aren't set up for personalization. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. Developing customizations, there's an awful lot you get out of the box with Sitecore. In our experience, about half the work we do is actually customizing what the out-of-the-box functionality allows you to do. So in the same way you develop websites on Sitecore using a framework and customizing it to meet your own needs, in exactly the same way, personalization, marketing automation, and so on require similar customizations, not necessarily to get them working, but often that's the case. Again, I'll cover a bit more about that in a second, but also to make them work as well as possible for your individual scenario, so you've got an elegant solution. And also when we get into the realms of integrating with other platforms that you've got, such as a common one we're asked about is integrating with things like MailChimp, Campaign Monitor, and so on, rather than using Sitecore's built-in marketing automation email campaign tools. There's things around that you need to be aware of as well. You can do it, but it needs development, so that all needs to be factored in as well. Implementation, so actually going and setting the stuff up, is probably the least taxing part of a personalization project or an automation or any other sort of marketing related projects in Sitecore. It's merely just legwork, which is implementing the stuff you've already scoped in previous phases. And then I call it the I'm going for a walk, and my colleagues at Ratio know what this means. It's basically when you've implemented it and nothing works. What we find with virtually every project we have is that you go and plan it, implement it, deliver it, and then things don't work. And not because it's been implemented incorrectly, but because there's things with the solution that need to be fixed, or there's little tweaks that need to be made to get it working. So there's a period of just sort of going back, having a look at what we've done, just checking that things are all set up correctly, making sure that it's deployed correctly, making sure that the code is supporting what we need it to do, so on and so forth. So there's always that kind of mop-up period afterwards, which can be quite frustrating because there's so many different things that can cause you to trip up once you've implemented. And lastly, custom reporting. So Sitecore 8, as many of you will know, introduced a whole level of additional reporting on previous versions. It's still quite limited, and what we've found, certainly with clients who are very or more advanced in analytics, or they want to get very specific information out of Sitecore on a regular basis, we often find that we barely touch the analytics reports within Sitecore, and instead we drag custom reports out. I'm just going to quickly speed through a couple of examples of this. First, I was talking about making sure that the solution is ready for personalization. What I mean by that is making sure that templates and components actually support it. We had a couple of clients when we first started out, and it was horrendous. We walked in and there was a page like we're looking at in front of us, except that it was just a square. There was one component and all the content was bunged into that component, which meant we couldn't have any granularity of control or indeed personalization or whatever else we wanted to do over any particular area of the page. A very simple way that you can go about checking that, if you go into the content editor view, navigate to the page that you want to personalize on, and you can see along the top you've got a tab called presentation. and I've circled a button there called Details. What this will take us into is a screen that shows us the different controls or components, if you like, that are available on our page. You can see here we've got a component that's got 2 personalization rules applied to it. If you click on Edit, you can go in and actually look at how those components are set up. If you see something like this, the chances are that your page is set up for personalization. If you see something like this, where there's no controls listed, and this is something we have seen before, you're not going to be able to do anything. Or at least if you are going to do something, you're going to have to hack it to death. So just a little tip, something to be wary of. Make sure before you get going with all this that your site can actually support it, because often corners have been cut during development. People have raced along, tried to develop templates as quickly as possible, and you've ended up with a site that you can't do anything with. Chances are, if you've got content editing problems along similar lines, then you're probably going to have the same problems with personalization. The next is around reporting. As I said, a lot of our clients want to get bespoke reporting out of Sitecore. For example, this is the experience profile in Sitecore 8 and above. This gives us an individual view of the contact. And it's great, we can pull this information out of it, we can share it with CRMs and so on. But actually, what if our sales team actually just wants to get a list of hot leads that have hit the site, the value they've generated, and when they visited? Let's say for our top 50 accounts. We've actually implemented this twice now. This is just pulling custom data out, for example, into an Excel sheet. So your sales team can all be sat there with Excel sheets, they can refresh it on a daily or a weekly basis, and they can put information directly out of Sitecore based on predefined criteria. And all we're doing is just creating a data point within Sitecore that Excel is pulling data from, defining what criteria we need to pull out, and that's it. It doesn't take long, maybe 2, 3, 4 days, and what you end up with is a report like this. So a report looking at our top 50 accounts, in this case banks, when they've been on the site, how much value based on the goals that they've triggered, they've generated for us. Another thing to be aware of is rules hell, is what I call it. It's very easy to try to get things to work the way you want it to work with Sitecore by trying to cobble together existing rules. And this is just a dummy example, but you get the idea. We're trying to do something for a very specific scenario, and what you do is you end up chaining together a bunch of rules, which maybe works on a one-off basis, but if you're going to try and roll this out, if you're going to start having additional rules running on a page or on a component, this quickly gets unmanageable. And so again, about half the projects we work on, we try to develop more elegant solutions. So rules that cater specifically for what you want to do with a user. In fact, we did one yesterday based on page events and a number of days elapsed, I think it was. So trying to, before you get into, let's try to set up rules and try and do it ourselves, have a think about, speak to your developers, explain what it is you're trying to achieve, and then try to build out the most elegant custom solution for you. Because it's going to help you massively in the long term and save you a huge amount of time. Otherwise, it's quite easy to spend hours setting these rules up as you start progressing. Bit of a topical one here for you, given we've just submitted notice for Article 50 for Brexit today. The pattern card post-truth. So profile cards and pattern cards is something that Sitecore talks a lot about. And this is the idea of being able to profile users as they're moving through your content. So you can eventually identify the kind of user interest they have based on the kind of content they're consuming. And within Sitecore, that's done using profile cards and pattern cards. The reason I try to steer some of our clients away from this is to give you an example here. It doesn't always work. So if we take an example of a travel customer, we've got a user who's browsing around Paris break pages. So they're having a look at Paris holidays, weekend break. They're looking at maybe 4 or 5 pages, and Sitecore's profiling them heavily as being a Paris break user, which seems logical, yeah? You're looking at Paris pages, therefore it's probably the sort of thing you're interested in. But then my user sees an advert on the site for a break in Berlin. They take one look at the page and they go and book. And now they're going to Berlin. So they're probably going to come back to the site the next time and say, well, okay, I want to see, what's on in Berlin, what events are happening, what about flights, what about car hire? But because Sitecore's profiled them as being a Paris user on a previous visit, or even in the current visit, they're now going to see Paris content everywhere. So we've broken the experience for them. And this is where I think profile and pattern cards perhaps aren't the best way to go necessarily for every single organization. we've developed something a bit more bespoke. I say developed as a combination of using the rules existing within Sitecore plus some setup, where we use it based on the last event viewed. And this is an example of where we have custom rules, some customizations that I referred to earlier. So user browses Paris breaks, they're tagged as a Paris break user as before. They eventually see a break to Berlin as before. Except now that what we're doing is we're tagging them as being a Berlin weekend user, because all we're doing is looking at the last content interaction. For a lot of holiday companies and a lot of other organizations, this is quite important because often people are only interested in the last thing they viewed, especially when you get to things like transaction. The user comes back next time and we've got a custom rule running that says personalized content on next visit. And we can also use things like existing tagging within Sitecore. So if you've got a taxonomy, for example, for a holiday company that's got different destinations, they've got different types of break, you know, honeymoon, weekend break, and so on. We can use all that. We can take all that and just say, if the content type equals honeymoon break, then we want to profile the homepage banner based on that. So we can save ourselves a lot of time around that as well. So I'm just trying to throw a few things at you to be wary of, because not everything out of the box really sort of suits most user scenarios. I'm going to just zip out of this and I'm going to go into Sitecore. So just take a note very quickly. I'm going to take you through this front end view. If you just give me 2 seconds. So if I just load up my home page, just take a look very quickly. We've got a home page carousel here. We've got a smartphone banner that comes up on first visit. And what we're going to do is just take you through a very quick content journey to show you how we bring in some of these different elements of Sitecore's functionality. So I'm going to simulate first someone who's coming from Bing and they're searching for a Surface Pro 4. So here's our results page. And you can see down here, Office Core, which is the name of our dummy company. We've got a campaign set up here. If you look down the bottom left-hand side of my screen in the browser bar, as I hover over that, you can see that we've got a link there, and it's got a string of letters and numbers at the end, and that's our campaign code. So that's a campaign code we set up in Sitecore. We're going to use that to personalize for our user when they hit the site. So if I click on that link, Sitecore goes, right, okay, you've triggered that campaign code. We know it's to do with Surface Pro 4, so we're going to show you a Surface Pro 4 banner. So we've got rid of those phones and the rotating carousel, and we're just showing Surface Pro 4 here. We're going to click on Learn More. It's going to take me through to the product page. And what we've got here is a form that's built using Web Forms for Marketers. Some of you may know Web Forms for Marketers is the module within Sitecore that allows you to create forms yourselves as a marketer or as someone else in the business, add and remove fields, make things mandatory, have checkboxes and so on. You hear a lot of mixed things about Web Forms for Marketers. I'm not here to talk about that, but this is what it's built in for the sake of the demo. What's going to happen when I submit this form is I've got a goal set up in the back end of the form. For callback submitted is the name of the goal. We'll have a look at it in a minute. And what I'm also going to do is that when I submit this form, it's going to put me into a marketing automation plan, or as Sitecore calls it, engagement automation. And what that means, you can see there we've got an email that's come up because I've submitted that form. I'm going to go back to the home page. And here you go, you can see that now Sitecore has an awareness that I've submitted that form, and it's started to put me into a nurture plan as well. So that's a very, very quick example of how we can use campaign codes, goals, put someone into a marketing automation plan. I'm just going to touch on pattern cards. Whilst I'm not a massive proponent of pattern cards, I'll just show you very quickly how this looks from a front-end perspective. We're going to products, go to X1 Games. Just very quickly have a look at this, sorry. You can see here, I've just exposed a bit of back-end functionality. When we're looking at profiling patterns and so on, we've just exposed a bit of the back-end tracking of our user. You can see here that in terms of site interest, we've now profiled this user as being a Surface interest type because they've been looking at Surface products. What that means is we can set up a personalization rule if we wanted to surface more Surface products to them. If I go back into products, just close that quickly. and go to Xbox One games. I'm going to start having a look through some games on here, and what's going to happen is I'm now going to get profiled as I go through as being someone who's interested in action games. So if I go through, have a look at a couple of these. Those of you who are gaming geeks may recognise a couple of these. Destiny, and let's go back and just make sure we're absolutely profiled. If I just open up that again, you can see I'm now profiled as an Xbox user, but also profiled as an action gaming user as well. What that means is, when we go out to the home page, we can have a rule running that completely swaps out that banner and carousel completely, and instead shows us a video relating to action games. So that's a front-end view of a sort of sample journey that we could set up. And what we're going to do now is go and have a look at how we set each of these components up, take you through how we did it. I'm not going to play around with the actual flow I've already got set up, because those of you who have ever done live demos will know that that's suicide. So what I'm going to do is just show you side by side how we can set up what we've already done in advance. So if I just go into the back end of Sitecore, I'm going to go into the marketing control panel to begin with. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to quickly show you something, because this will relate back a bit later on. Experience Analytics. If you haven't seen Experience Analytics before, this is the out-of-the-box reporting interface that you get from Sitecore 8 and beyond. There's an awful lot of Google Analytics style functionality in here, acquisition, top content, exit pages, top campaigns, and so on. So this picks up all the data that we're capturing about our users based on all the data foundation that we've set up across the site. Now, it's important to note that you are not going to see a huge amount of data in here until you've set that data foundation up. So when you've defined what your goals are, when you've defined how many points you're going to give to those goals, when you've defined your marketing taxonomy and so on, and you've applied all that, only at that point will you start to see any meaningful information coming through here. People often ask us, do we use this alongside Google Analytics? Well, yeah, the thing is, yes, you probably will do, but you'll get a different view of information from what you've got in this interface here. What we do have is a couple of interesting things. If you get into the sort of space of pattern matching, so if you start to use pattern cards in Sitecore, there's no data in here because it's a demo site, you can start to see how people who match different patterns of behavior are performing on your site. By the way, you can also integrate all this data into Google as well, so you can use Google's API to create custom GA reports too. That's something for another day. But what you can also do is have a view on how different facets of channels, campaigns, goals, and so on are performing through Sitecore's interface. So you can create quite bespoke taxonomies of reporting quite easily using the marketing control panel. I'll just go back in and show you how that's done. So if I go to the marketing control panel, I'm showing this in Sitecore 8, by the way. A lot of this functionality is the same in previous versions. It just looks a bit different. One thing you probably won't have if you're pre-Sitecore 8 is this taxonomies option at the top. So if I just go and open this up, I love taxonomies, and I love taxonomies because out of the box, Sitecore gives you a very, very limited view on what goals, what your highest performing goals and your highest performing channels and assets and downloads and so on are. Very, very limited view. They introduced taxonomies, and what this allows us to do is to create groups, or if you like, taxonomies of those different types of interactions so that we can report on them at a higher level. Let's say, for example, you've got, I don't know, 5 PDF goals set up around the site. Each of those might have its own goal because let's say you want to measure each one differently, or you want to personalize off the back of each one very specifically. Well, that's great, but when you go into reporting, they will show up as individual goals in your top 5 or top 10, and everything else will be lost. By using taxonomies, what we can do is we can create classifications such as PDF downloads, or particular types of campaigns, or particular types of assets, and so on, and then report at those at a higher level. If I just give you an example, I think I've got one set up in here. So we've got campaign groups. So we might have multiple campaign codes, we might have hundreds of campaign codes, and we can't logically report on each of those, even though they were individually created at the time for a particular reason. What we can do, though, is classify them. So we can create taxonomies within Sitecore, exactly the same for marketing functions as we do with content, which means we can group it together and we can do things off the back of this. We have a look at outcomes, We can create the same with outcomes, so you might have purchase or download or made a phone call or whatever. These can all be classified as outcomes. We can apply these around the site. We can also do it by channel. One of the questions we got was, before this webinar, was, is it better to use a single campaign code and then assign channels to it as a facet, or to have multiple campaign codes and so on, so you can see how your different channels are performing. I'll cover that off in a second, but channels really are things that you can create and then assign to campaigns or goals, so you wouldn't get away from the fact that you would still need to have a different campaign code for a different channel if you wanted to track them separately. It does allow you to group it, so you can still group it, and then this is all exposed in your reporting. I hope this is making sense so far. A lot of this is quite new. But all you need to know is you can create these campaign classifications. Down here we've got facets as well. A good example of this, let's say you've got a goal facet which is a transactional facet, or you might have something which is an info sheet download facet, or you might have something which is a video facet. You can assign goals to facets to goals. So facets, again, are just creating different views for reporting purposes on how people are performing on your site. It's just classification. Trying to get your head around that and setting it up might take you slightly longer, but that's why it's there. It's essentially a classification mechanism to allow for easier reporting. So hopefully I haven't confused you too much with that. We'll start by looking at campaigns, because that was the first stage of our demo journey. So if I have a look in campaigns, you can see that we've got, again, different classifications. So all this can be created by you. We've got different groups. So we've grouped, in this case, by landing page, by offline, by PPC, social, and so on. And we created a campaign code that we used earlier called this Bing Ad Surface Pro 4. If I click on that, it brings up the content panel on the right-hand side. And you can see here, as we go down, that we've started to classify our campaign based on those classifications, the taxonomy we just looked at. So we've got channels, for example, that we've already created. In this case, it's Bing ads, or you might want to call it social ads or something else. So again, so we can report on this. We've also given it a campaign group as well. So if we want to classify things by campaign group, we've chosen a group here as well, which in this case is page search. We might also want to assign a marketing asset to it. So for example, if we're asking people to download a PDF, we might want to assign a marketing asset. In this case, we've got a couple there. So there's a video, we've got a download thing up there. And again, we can apply facets to this as well. I don't think we've actually got any set up on the demo site. But we could we can have facets such as, January campaigns, or tactical campaigns, or reactive campaigns, or whatever we want to call it. We can assign all these facets here, and again, we can report on these later. As we get down further, this is the more important stuff for actually making personalization work. There's the title of our campaign code, and here we've got a campaign link. So this is automatically generated when we create our campaign. So this string is randomly generated. It's never repeated, obviously, and this whole element is what you would use as the link that you put on your external campaign activity. So things that are tracking back to the site. So if we go back to our initial, go back to our Office Core search, so our Bing page, and we just have a look. You can see here, Surface Pro 4 at Office Core. If I hover over that, you can see there's our campaign code that we used down the bottom there. So you just need to put a question mark and the campaign code at the back of your link, and then Sitecore will recognize that coming into the site. Now, like I said, people often ask us, do we use a different campaign code per channel? Can we use a campaign code for more than one channel? Yes, you can, is the answer to both of those. It depends on how you want to report it. If you need to report on a very granular level on how particular adverts from particular channels are performing, you will need to create a different campaign code for every single one of those. If you're happy just to have one campaign code for all your social channels, one campaign code for all your email channels and so on, then you can also do that to keep life simpler. And you might want to do that to begin with until you see a channel that's performing particularly well or particularly badly, so that you can then drill down and start to get more granular about how you how you assign campaign codes and how you create those. So this is the campaign code that we used, and Sitecore is just saying, when I click on that, well, I've overridden it now because I've just been through the content journey, but what it would show, because we have a priority order of rules, which I'll show you in a second, that campaign code is then triggering off the Surface 4 advert that we saw earlier. There's other things in this screen I'm not going to show just because we haven't got a huge amount of time on the call today, but there are other things such as enrolling engagement plans, durations and costs and so on that we can also use when we get a bit more advanced. You'll remember what we did before is we went to Surface Pro 4 and we had this form down here. Now the form had a goal sat behind it, so we're going to have a very quick look at goals. If I go into the goals section of our marketing control panel here, you can see that we've got different goals set up, and the one that we used was in here, which is callback form completed. Setting up a goal is really, really simple. It's literally just as we saw with campaign codes, it's really just a paint by numbers. As you go down, you choose how you want to classify it, what facets you want to apply to it, and eventually you'll get down to this all-important data section. So you can give it a name. The important thing here is how many points you give your goal. Now, the reason I say it's important, if you're not familiar with the concept of goals in Sitecore, goals are essentially, as you know from Google Analytics, sort of transactional points in your site. Whether that's purchasing or downloading something or watching a video, whatever it might be, it's something, a transaction that users is undertaking. Each of those goals will have a value to your organization. So in this case, we've got 100 points assigned to this, but we have an arbitrary scale that we create, and we do this using goal workshops with our clients. But essentially, you note down or you classify all the different goals you have on your site. You give them a point, a number of points based on how important that goal is to you. And then you go in here and assign it. Now, it's important that this is agreed across anybody who's going to have the ability to set it up. The reason for that is that if someone comes in here and they're running a campaign, they're off by themselves and they're setting it all up, and they decide that their submit button on their campaign page is worth 1,000 points, all of a sudden your stats everywhere else are skewed because you've got someone who's created a rogue goal with an unagreed point assigned to it. So this scale of points that you use needs to be defined and agreed up front. And again, I could talk a lot about this, but I need to sort of skim through it a little bit. But you set up the points for the goal here. And again, as you go down, you can set up other things around it and rules and so on. But from a very base level, you set up a goal. Now, there is something else in Sitecore called page events. You may have heard of it. A page event is a hidden goal. If I just very quickly show you where it's located, if you go into the content editor, you may not have access to this. You may need to get access opened up to it. But if you go into the content editor, if you go into System, Settings, and then Analytics here, you can see we've got an option called Page Events. Page events are basically goals at a very, very rough and raw level, but what they are is hidden goals. That's the way I like to describe them. So we know that all our goals are tracked in our analytics, but what if we have goals that we don't want to clutter up our analytics with, such as maybe page views or hidden goals, things that we want to do something off the back of, but we don't want to track them explicitly and show them in reports. We can use page events for that, and you can see an example here. It's actually not that big goal we just looked at, because we actually use page events quite a lot. For example, in that example for replacing pattern cards with last event, we do it using page events. So it's worth knowing that this is here. It's a hidden goal, basically. And again, the concept of keeping the points values the same and agreed and consistent as well. So that's goals. And we assigned a goal in the example we showed to our Surface 4 Pro footer. So if I go into our products and I go to our Surface Pro 4 page, goals can be assigned in a number of ways. I'm going to go into Experience Editor here just because it's the easiest way to use Sitecore's marketing features. But if I go in here, we can can apply goals to links. So if I wanted to turn that keyboard word into a link, I could apply a goal to that. I could apply a goal to a button, which requires a little bit of development because it's more of a programmatic goal. I can apply a goal to a page view. I can apply a goal to a couple of other things as well, including a form. So in this case, I've got a form that we've set up here. And I've assigned a goal at the back of it, which we triggered earlier, which was our callback submitted form. So if I go in here, I'll show you how we got to that. We've got a submit button on our form in the form editor. If I click on that, we've got our save action. And you can see here that I've got our register a conversion, register a goal here. So I can go in, I can click on a conversion, press add, edit it, and then just go and set up our goal that's going to be submitted, or whatever I want to call it, with this callback. There we go. Callback form completed, our goal set up. Goals, again, like I said earlier, is really, really simple. The thought really is going into the points that you're using and how you're going to set up the scale of points and where those are going to be applied. So it's a little bit on goals. Automation. I'm just very quickly going to hop back to the home page because I want to show you and talk a little bit about how this all looks when we set it up on the homepage banner, which is the one that was changing. So we're playing around with. If I click on that, you can see we've got this little floating toolbar. You can do this with the content editor as well. If you want to know how, just send us an email. I'll take you through it. Option. Set up. So I think it's actually we went through it. So we've got the PPC campaign, so where that campaign has been triggered, where the callback we set up has been completed. We want to show something else, where the visitor matches the action game of profile. Again, we've got that rule set up. And we've got another rule we haven't actually used in this session. These rules, just as a bit of context, they can be chained together within each rule. But we can also give a priority to each rule. So when I was trying to show you the goal being triggered, sorry, the campaign being triggered earlier, is because our campaign was actually way down this list here. So it had been overridden by our pattern card match. But you can move these up and down. So you can change the priority. So let's say you've got two goals running and you want to personalize off one of them more than the other if it's been triggered. You can actually change the priority using these move up and down buttons. You can also if you notice at the top here, you can personalization of the component. And what that means is that let's say you've got a banner, but you want to replace it with a video, which is what we did when we went through the journey. We have to turn this on. Otherwise, Sitecore is trying to shunt content into a placeholder that won't accept it. So if you want to swap a banner or an image, or whatever's there, out for something else that renders differently, then you need to make sure that's checked. Let's just have a look at the goal that we just set up. Just open the rules engine quickly. You can see within here we've got all our different rules that we can set up based on visit, based on historical data, based on goals triggered, device used, country visited from, and so on. And you can see down here we've set up a very quick rule, which is literally just a case of saying, okay, if a goal's been triggered, I'm going to click on specific, I'm going to check the goal that we want to choose, which is call that form, press OK, and that's literally it. Our goal is now set up and we can choose the content that we want to assign to it. So we just click on the presentation and we've got a couple of things we can show within here. So the goal is very simple. What I will say is this, and that is if you're a pre-Sitecore 8, you will not have a lot of these rules out of the box, and so you will need to create them. A very good example of that is if you're trying to personalize based on historical data, you will need to create a custom rule. It can be done. It just, for some reason, doesn't allow you to do it out of the box. We also noticed that some of the rules in Sitecore 7.5 don't work as expected. For example, if you're trying to do something off a page event that was triggered during a current visit, that doesn't work. We've just had to fix that for another client. So there's a few things in here which, as with everything with Sitecore, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is why, planning and knowing what you're doing is quite important, just to try and save yourself a bit of time. But actually setting up rules in here is reasonably straightforward. So that's how those actions that we saw in that journey earlier are being done. It's literally just by rules. And this is why of setting Sitecore up, taxing, because it's literally just setting up rules. The complexity comes in the planning and the customization and everything else. Just to finish off, because we're 40 minutes in, I'm just going to touch on marketing automation. Because what happened when I submitted that form earlier is I was also being put in a marketing automation plan. If you're familiar with things like Eloqua, Marketo, and a few other marketing automation suites there, I think Dynamics has got one as well. Sitecore has something similar. They're just about to release a new version in Sitecore 8.3, which is a bit more user-friendly and a bit more up-to-date. So if I open up one of these engagement plans, you can see a very simple two-step plan that we've got here for someone who's filled out a form and we want to send an email to them. And then we've got another one just above it, which is a bit more complex. I actually love engagement plans. I think they are probably the most underused feature of Sitecore. But they're actually one of the most powerful because you can save your marketing team an awful lot of time by starting to automate actions through engagement automation. Whether it's just sending up nurture emails or whether it's creating an entire complex campaign, a bit like this one here, around it. I actually worked on this about 6 months ago, and it took about a day. So forgive me for the brevity, but I'm just going to quickly talk you through what it is that each of these things can do, just so you've got an awareness of how it all fits together. I'm just going to go into the design view. By the way, these engagement automation plans, they can also integrate with things outside of Sitecore. So you can see this is a very kind of different structure. If we want to do something with a user, so say for example we want to push them from one state to the next based on an action that they've taken elsewhere, for example in a CRM system, if we've updated their profile, we can take that information. We've tried it before. Sometimes it's a few lines of code, sometimes it's a bit complex, but just to let you know, especially templates for nurture email set up in Campaign Monitor, and we want Sitecore to tell the user at which stage we want, template A or template B, nurture email 1, 2, 3, whatever, to be sent to a user. So we can configure that. A developer can do that for us in here. But in a nutshell, engagement automation is where we started by putting a user earlier into our state here where they're awaiting a callback. So we only got through the first couple of stages in the demo. But users can be in a state, which is like this green one at the top left. Then we can have a condition, which in this case, did they complete a form? And then we can have actions that happen if that action is taken. So in this case, it's sending an email to the user to say, thank you for filling in the form. And you can see if our condition, we can see that we only want it to be true if our callback form goal was completed. And if I edit rule there, you can see we've got a almost exactly the same list of rules as we had in the personalization editor just now. And we can send people through this. We can dump records into CRM, update profiles. We can serve different types of content to them. We can assign reports for them. We can do a whole bunch of other stuff. I recommend starting simple with this. And a very good example of this is starting with maybe a two-step plan. So if someone downloads a PDF, you maybe send another email with more related information, and then you might send a second email that's got more of a call to action around it. Start with that, because what you can do is start to measure engagement. So by bringing in things like campaign codes, by bringing in things like goals as part of this, then we can say, okay, if the user got the second email but they didn't do anything off the back of it, they didn't trigger any goals, we want to send them a different type of nurture message. So all the stuff I've spoken about today, we can build into these engagement plans as well. We can also monitor as well. So you can see here that we've got a little pie chart, but we can click on each of these areas and we can see how many people are in each stage. So we can always have a real-time view, give or take 20 minutes, of how many people are in each stage of our engagement automation plan. So we can see where perhaps there's bottlenecks, or where people are falling out, or where there's people who are moving through particularly quickly. And that is it from me. I hope that was a useful overview. Every time I run through this, I come up with lots of new things that I want to talk about, but I have to be conscious of time and trying to keep people's attention. If you've got any specific questions, then I think Mario is going to take those and read out any you've got now. So I'll hand over to you, Mario.
Cool. Thanks very much, Steve. Just have a look at the questions. Yep, this is a good one actually. It's just come in. Question on personalization. How do we personalize at scale when we potentially have thousands of content items?
So personalization at scale is an interesting one, and that can take several different forms. A couple of things. One is if you have several clearly defined sections of content on your site, you may want to use your existing taxonomy and just use that to drive your personalization rather than trying to tag up content with profile cards, pattern cards. I didn't actually have time to cover those today just because they're quite complex and because of time limitations. But you can do it, instead of using profile and pattern cards, you can just use your existing taxonomy to say, okay, if someone looks at a Paris related page, we want to show them Paris related content. So we can do that. The other thing we can do is we can also, again, along customer, sorry, Mary, you might want to mute yourself while you're waiting for me to answer.
Apologies.
Sorry, there's a bit of a whistling noise. So the other thing I was going to say was that you can also create, if you want to go down the route of using pattern cards and profile cards, for example, which is usually where the scale question comes in, you can also set up those in a custom central location within the content tree, assign points to those, and then say, okay, if the user has got, if a content item has got a particular template, we want to automatically assign a particular profile card to it. Or if it sits within a particular category of the site, we want to assign automatically a particular profile card to it. So rather than having to get people to think about it and to apply it every time and to go back and have to retrospectively fit it, we can actually go and assign those automatically as the content's being produced. So it takes all the thinking and the thought away from it and also maintains consistency. And it means we can change that at any time in the future as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Steve. Another question. Can we personalize based on historical and current data?
Yes, you can. Pre-Sitecore 7, pre-Sitecore 7.5, you need to create a custom rule in order to do that, because by default it only does it in the current session. If you want to do, historically you can create a custom rule. 7.5, it sometimes doesn't work, so again you may need to create something custom, but in Sitecore 8 that should work out of the box. So yes, you can take all past interactions, and you can also set a time limit on when those interactions take place as well. So we can say that if the goal was only triggered in the last 3 visits or in the last 30 days, then we can set a time limit on it as well.
Perfect. Feel free to keep your questions rolling in. We've got a few more minutes left. Any questions which you don't manage to answer today, we will follow up with you with an answer in the next 24 hours. The next one, can we stop personalizing after a set period of time?
Yeah, I guess I kind of just answered that one as well, which is you can set things like number of elapsed days. So we can stop personalizing after 30 days if you've taken an action, so we can reset your experience. So that's all doable, yeah. Or we can do it on number of visits, for example, or after a particular date.
A question around tagging Sitecore tracking links with other platforms. So do the campaign links work in combination with things like AdWords, auto tagging, double click, etc.?
Yeah, we've done it on a few. Mostly using things like AdWords, but we have tested it on lots of platforms, and you can just add that campaign code already created a link. I just will caveat that with it depends on the platform. But as you can see, if you want to test it, all you need to do, it will take you 2 seconds to set up a campaign code and then just try it. Just see if you can put it into your inbound link and just check it works by setting up some personalized content.
Cool, thank you. Actually got quite a good question come in. You mentioned that stage 2 in your enlightenment was all about fixing issues. What are the most common issues you encounter in people's setups? I know you covered a few at the beginning, but what are, I suppose, the common ones you come across?
Well, by far the most common one is that the pages and templates and components don't support personalization. There's often softer hidden problems as well, which are less obvious, and that could literally be anything. The other thing that we often find is that the system is already at capacity in terms of load, and so there needs to be some thought given as to scale. Tends to only be a problem if you're really having problems with capacity, but that's certainly something to be wary of. We've actually also developed a checklist. It's called I forget what we've called it, Mary. I think it's a marketing readiness checklist, but it's got about 30 questions on it, and it will take you through all the things you need to check before you start a project. So technical, but also business as well. So have you thought about things like KPIs? Do you have any concept of journeys? But that's all part of the planning process we do. We try to drag all that out, but there's certainly a lot on the technical side that can trip you up. Analytics databases not being set up correctly is another one. But yeah, I mean, there could be many different reasons, things to check for. But yeah, we've got the checklist, and if you want to have a chat with us, we can probably share that with you.
Brilliant, thank you. That brings us to the end of today's Q&A. I appreciate there's a few people who didn't manage to get round to answering your questions. As I said before, we'll try by tomorrow to get back to you with written answers because we didn't cover them off today. Apologies if anyone was experiencing some audio issues. I know a few of the guys on the line had a few audio problems, so accept our apologies for that. We hope today's session was useful. Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The session was recorded, and I'll be sharing the link to today's recording by the end of this week. So leaves me to say goodbye and thank you.